A few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had recently bought it and had it completely renovated. He put it up for sale but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I realized there was something wrong with the lady next door. She was about 45, but looked much older. She would sit up all night listening to Christian radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep, so I went over to her place and asked her to keep it down. She opened her door and I got a quick peek. Her walks all had crosses painted on them in different colors, and words like Jesus and angels scribbled everywhere. The windows were painted black, letting in no light at all. It was damp, yellow-stained 50-year-old carpets, dog shit and cockroaches everywhere. No dog though. I asked her to please keep it down. She just looked at me and shut the door. Then she turned up the radio even louder. The next day I had my girlfriend staying over. I wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow of a person next to the bed looking at us sleeping. I think I'm hallucinating, as I usually do in the dark when I'm sleepy. But then the shadow starts talking. It's my neighbor, and she's holding something in her hand. She broke in during the night, and who knows how long she stood there.
"You should lock your door at night,"
she says and walks out. The next morning, I hear someone making strange noises below my bedroom window. It's my neighbor, talking to herself in tongue. She has a plastic bag in her hand, with her rotting, dead dog inside. It's hot as hell outside, and I can smell death from the bag. At this point, I'm scared shitless. She's obviously very insane. I go upstairs and knock on another person's door and ask what the hell is going on. The guy is as scared as me. Apparently she broke into his apartment one evening as well, while he was watching TV with his kids. He got up from the couch to get a snack, only to find her behind the couch staring at him, holding a power drill. At this stage, I'm basically shitting myself. I call the cops and they know all about her. Apparently she's a violent schizophrenic and she hasn't taken her meds, but they can't force her or enter her apartment without permission because she owns it. The only thing they can do is get her when she goes outside. I sit up for the next 2 days, waiting for her to run out of cigarettes. When I hear her leave at 2 a.m. to go across the road to the 7-Eleven, I call the cops. They have 3 cars and a special van over in less than 2 minutes. They restrain her and throw her in the van and drive off to some institution. And in less than a minute, it's like she was never there. I never see her again, but I still have nightmares about her looking at me in my sleep.
When you think of Counter-Strike Global Offensive, the last thing you'd think of was a horror story. But yet, here I am. It was the summer of 2014 and I was bored and home alone, so naturally I hopped on CSGO. I went to Dust Online to play some casual. It wasn't a very busy lobby, there was about 5 people on each side. I joined Terrorist, where I quickly discovered the only other person with a mic was a guy whose name was something like Smarties McFlurry. He sounded a lot older than me, I was 14 at the time. His name was Dave and we got along well and we played good together since we had the same number of skill. We eventually played more CSGO together and then friended each other on Steam. After that, he asked for some of my social media, and I gave him my Discord and Snapchat. Then on CSGO, Dave suddenly said he had to leave and we could play more tomorrow. So I got off and watched some TV and eventually went to sleep on the couch. I was home alone for the night. At like 1 a.m., I awoke and got a glass of water. Then I heard a Snapchat notification from my phone. Curious as to who was sending snaps at this time of night, I picked it up and saw it was from Dave. I opened it, and it was a picture of my front lawn and house. The phone and the glass of water fell from my hands to the floor, and my heart began to race. I was suddenly frozen, as if rooted to the spot. The darkness around me seemed to become thicker, and I swear I was seeing shadows all around me. Then I heard a knock at the glass. I turned to the back window, and there he was, the Dave guy, who looked a lot older and creepier than me. Without thinking, I ran to the back door, locked it. I also locked the front door. I could hear him calling to me through the window. Then I proceeded to run to the only windowless room, the bathroom. I stayed in there for about an hour, shaking and fearing the worst. I dreaded hearing the sound of Dave calling me again, a knock at the door, or even footsteps outside. I don't know how long it was before I fell asleep. The next morning, my parents arrived home, and I hesitated to tell them about my experience. I knew they would drop shit on me, but it wasn't just that. I was questioning whether or not I was dreaming when the Dave guy appeared at my house. I knew I had not been dreaming playing CSGO with him, though. However, when I checked my phone, it was like he didn't exist. He was not on my friends list in CSGO, his Steam account was gone, his Discord was gone, and even his Snapchat was gone, all deleted. To this day, I still question my sanity about whether or not this Dave guy who I played CSGO with really existed. I know for sure we had chatted on the game, on Discord and on Snapchat, but had he really come to my house? And why were all of his online accounts deleted? I really don't know.
One day, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, my mom had gone to my older sister's recital in Georgia, and my dad was at work. He was a pilot for some airline. So she left me and my older brother, who was only 12 at the time, at the sitter's house, which was a few blocks away from my house. My sitter, who I'm going to call Bev, was 19, and she was pretty much the best kind of sitter to a 6 to 7-year-old boy could ask for. She'd let us play games and stay up watching TV, as long as we didn't bother her while she was on the phone with her boyfriend. We were watching TV, and we could hear something scratching the paneling on the side of the house. Naturally, we blew it off as a stray animal, so we continued watching TV. About 30 minutes to an hour later, Bev ran into the living room and locked the front door and shut the blinds. We were curious as to what she was doing. Me and my brother, being kids, got scared and started crying. Then Bev said everything would be okay. It was just a peeping Tom. So she took us upstairs and we went to her parents' room with the Nintendo and some snacks. She said stay put and not to touch anything we didn't bring into the room. Not a minute later after she walked out of the room, we heard a loud crash and glass shattering in the room below us. The sicko had thrown a brick from the walkway through the guest bedroom window and managed to get in. I remember Bev running into the room and pulling us into the closet and telling us we were going to play a game of hide and seek and to be very quiet. She got out of the closet and locked it from the outside latch and disappeared. Several minutes passed and we could hear a grown man screaming, come out wherever you are. I only want to play." Then I heard what sounded like water running in the bathroom across from the closet. Then it shut off. And I heard Bev yelling something at the man. It was something like, "The police are on their way. You better get out of my fucking house now." Then we could hear loud, heavy footsteps sprinting out of the room, and then sirens wailing in the distance. Bev shrieked, and we heard a loud thud on the ground below us. Bev had managed to find an old wooden bat. As the man turned a corner to go out the front door, Bev swung the bat as hard as she could, knocking the man to the floor. Dazed, he got up and tried chasing her outside, but the cops had already arrived and tackled the man on sight. My mom came home immediately and took me, my brother, and Bev back to my house. A few years later, she explained that the man was a known sex offender and had escaped from prison. In the report, he was said to be carrying a rather large knife in his pocket and had a Saturday night special tucked away in the waist of his pants.
This story is totally true. It happened to me when I was about 4 years old. My dad used to really like going on vacation with me and my family. One time, we went to what I think was Big Bear, but I'm not sure. Anyways, we rented a cabin. I don't remember much, but I remember the inside of the cabin was beautiful. The furniture was all colorful and decorated in Christmas colors, but it was around Christmas time. It was very roomy, and it was 2 floors and had its own den, kitchen, and bedroom. We arrived during the day, and everything seemed normal. When night came, however, we started hearing noises. It sounded like someone was shaking the front doorknob trying to get in. I was the first to notice, and I told my mom, but she didn't believe me. Then she saw it too. For a couple of minutes, the front doorknob just kept shaking by itself, and we were too afraid to go look out the door. Then we heard another noise. It sounded like steel hitting steel. Then it stopped. My dad was afraid someone was trying to break in, so we packed up all of our things so we can leave. But before we did, my dad called the police and asked them to come search the premises. We exited out the back door because the noises were coming from the front. Our car was down the hill from the back of the cabin. I fell asleep in the car and woke up the next morning in a small rinky-dink motel room that was nothing as roomy and beautiful as the cabin. I was so bummed, but I was quickly relieved we had left because later that day, we found out who was making those noises. The police had arrived there and searched the outside and found nothing. Then they went inside and found a man that had 2 hooks instead of hands. He had been twisting the doorknob with his hook. Then he clashed his hooks together, and that's what we heard was it still on steel. We found out that about 5 minutes after we left the cabin, he successfully broke in and started searching for us. The police found bodies stashed in the upstairs closet. When we were on our way home from the motel, we stopped at a gas station near the cabin where the madman had tried to break in. My mom knew it was a bad idea, but my dad told her to relax. The cops took care of that guy. He's nowhere near us. We all went into the little shop to buy some candy and snacks. We were quite surprised when we came out of the shop and headed back to our car. There was a note on the hood that read, "There's more of us. See you soon." It's safe to say that we never went back to that cabin again.
This story happened when I was 18 years old and a senior in high school. It was an ordinary night. My dad worked the night shift, so we all decided to sleep in my parents' room. I was with my younger brother, who was 15 years old at the time, my younger sister, who was 11 years old, and my mom. My parents' room was a small, purple, square-shaped room, which also had a bathroom. The bathroom's door was across from the bed. My younger brother and I slept on my parents' bed while my mom and my younger sister slept on the floor. Before sleeping, we all had a short conversation, and after that, we went to sleep at 9 p.m. At 2 a.m., I was awakened by a strange sensation. As I opened my eyes, I had my eyes fixed on the bathroom door, which was cracked open. To my surprise, I noticed a black figure, which looked exactly like my younger brother. The figure stood there with his arms crossed, watching me. However, his eyes were shut. At that moment, I froze. I couldn't move from the bed, and I was scared that if he opened his eyes, he would have red or bloodshot eyes. I decided to quietly turn my head to the other side of the bed to see if it was indeed my brother. My heart sunk to my stomach when I realized that my brother was sleeping right next to me. So many thoughts kept racing through my head. Who is this person? Why is he here? How could he look exactly like my brother? I tried as hard as possible to sleep and ignore what I saw. A few minutes later, after opening and closing my eyes, I was shocked to see that the figure was now standing above me, still looking right into my eyes with his eyes shut. My eyes were wide open from the shock. I felt like I was going to die from a heart attack. I felt as if he was starting to open his eyes, which scared me and caused me to close my eyes and force myself to sleep. Forcing myself to sleep worked, and the next thing I knew, it was morning. When I woke up, I headed to the living room and saw my mom. After holding it inside for a bit, I gave up and told my mom about the incident. I almost froze when she said she saw the same exact figure and witnessed what happened. It was terrifying. We both saw the same black figure that looked exactly like my brother. It was as if he was my brother's twin. We lived in that house for 2 more years until we finally moved out. After the move, we told my dad about this story because he doesn't like hearing creepy stories, so we kept it a secret until we moved. He surprised us by saying that we were not alone. He saw some strange things in that house as well. One day, when I was in the 6th grade, on a rainy day, I was walking home. On my walk, which is about a mile or so long, I had to walk through a cemetery. Not a stereotypical, shabby, haunted one, but one that had many people walking through and was usually full of maintenance employees. I remember walking by a group of them sitting on benches on a break. I thought nothing of it, as he stood up and started walking at a fair distance. After a bit, I looked back at him and he looked down quickly. He was in the same baby blue uniform as the others and had a gray beard, but I made out a name tag, Frank P. As the other workers faded from sight, he was still behind me. I began to worry. A moment later, he called out, "It's wet, huh?" in a friendly voice. I chuckled politely and agreed. My worries increased a second later when I walked out and he was still behind me. I was close to my house now and it started to pour. My house in sight, I started jogging to get there. I glanced back and I saw the man, visibly angry, start running. As my house got closer, I began to sprint. I didn't look back as I slung the key out of my backpack and opened the door. I looked behind me. I saw the man in the middle of the street. I walked over to the phone and dialed 911. Before I called, I looked out the window. He was gone. I told my mom what happened when she got home. She didn't believe me. That night, I couldn't sleep. There was lightning outside, and I could see occasional shadows from the flashes through my window in my living room. I lay watching the flashes when I saw a strange outline. I looked closer and saw an outline of a man. I stood up and walked out of my room. I walked into the living room. It was completely dark outside. I stood in the doorway and waited. A car's headlight illuminated the pale, shallow face of Frank P. I ran into my room and locked the door. Never saw him after that night. But whenever I see that baby blue uniform, I think back to that night and that haunting image of a skeletal, unnatural face of Frank P.
I was 10 years old, and I was home alone. But that wasn't a big deal because we lived in a small city. My mom and dad were at my grandma's house. I couldn't go because I was sick. It was around 9 p.m. when I was about to go to sleep. My room was really small, and it only had one window facing my bed. That window to me was kind of scary, because when you're a little kid, your imagination can sometimes go wild. At that time, it wasn't my imagination, though. Like I said, I was about to go to bed when I heard a loud scream coming from outside. It was really scary, but I tried to be quiet so I could listen to what was going on outside. Nothing was happening, though. It was really quiet, like nothing had happened at all. Quieter than normal, actually. Some time had passed, and everything seemed okay, so I just laid down and tried to sleep. 1 hour later, I heard that loud scream again. But this time, it seemed to be closer. I froze. I was so freaked out I couldn't even move. 30 minutes later, again, the same scream. At that point, I was about to cry. I don't know why, but that scream wasn't just a scream. It was at this high pitch, and it was just so creepy. Finally, 15 minutes later, I saw something at that window. It was a really skinny woman, and she seemed so happy for some reason. She was smiling, and her smile was so big and creepy. When I saw her, I started crying, and she started screaming again. I was horrified. She was just looking at me, smiling and screaming for the whole night. The next morning, my parents came back home, and I told them everything. They called the police, and the police found out that my window, that was facing my bed, was broken. But it didn't seem like it was broken with some sort of weapon, but as if it were broken by a really high pitch.
I was 10 at the time this happened. I loved my bedroom, since it had a TV, a bed, and a closet with my computer on my desk. One night when I was sleeping, I heard a noise coming from my closet, which kind of woke me up. I didn't mind it at all because I was still trying to fall back asleep to go to school tomorrow. 3 hours later, after I woke up and ate breakfast, I was getting ready to pack my bag, which was in my bedroom, for school. When I got in my room and packed my bag, I looked at the window and saw some tall black figure with a hoodie outside of my bedroom window. My heart dropped. And when I said, "Who in the world is that?" the figure ran away. I didn't see the figure's face since he was wearing a black hoodie, and it was a little dark outside since it was 5 a.m. in the morning. After I came back from school, I was on my phone researching for my school project. Suddenly, I heard a loud tap on the window. It was that figure again, and this time I saw his face. He was a man in his late 40s. He had wrinkly skin and had black hair. He smiled at me and said, "Hey, want some candy? Come outside of your house and I'll give you some." He laughed and waited for me to come outside. He ran to the front door and made a mistake by standing there because my dad was going to go to work, and he opened the front door and yelled at him to get the hell off his property or he'll call the police. I rushed to my dad and told him he'd been outside of my bedroom window stalking me. He was about to call the police when he realized he didn't want me to get scared that I was going to get kidnapped or something. So he said he would install security cameras. The only reason why I didn't scream when he was outside of my bedroom window is because that I thought it was one of my friends trying to study with me. But I thought to myself, why the hell would any of my friends want to study at 5 a.m. in the morning? And none of my friends were really that tall. That night, I heard someone laughing in my closet. I didn't open my eyes, but I was scared to death, since I heard that he was scratching the bedroom closet with something that sounded kind of like a knife. I waited a minute or two until I built up my courage to make a run for it and scream for my life while I ran to my parents' bedroom and locked the door. I explained to them what happened, and there was someone in my closet. My mom called 911, and the guy was saying stuff like, "Come out, and I won't make your parents watch as I stab you." And that was the thing that made me so scared, because my brain was alerting me that he did have a knife. Seconds later, we heard sirens, and me and my parents heard the police bust the door yelling, "Police, drop your weapon and put your hands up." Me and my parents were relieved that he was gone. I was very lucky that my closet was far away from my bed. It turned out that the guy was a crazy mental guy who escaped from his mental hospital by stabbing the security guards and breaking out. From now on, my parents have set up security cameras in each and every room, and also outside. Who knows what would have happened to me if I didn't hear him laughing in my closet? Would I have been stabbed to death Or what if he was hiding under my bed? Since that day, I still don't know how he got in my parents' house. Maybe my mom or dad forgot to lock the front door. Or he got in from my bedroom window.
When I was 19 years old in 1985 on New Year's Eve, a bunch of my friends and I went to a rooftop bar of a hotel. About a half hour before midnight, I ran down to my car because I had forgotten my camera. I figured I would have plenty of time to get back up there and find my friends. I grabbed my camera and I got into an elevator all by myself. About halfway up, the elevator started shaking and it stopped completely. I was trapped. I have always had a problem with confined spaces, so this was not an ideal situation for me. After a few minutes, everything went silent that was going on outside. Then out of nowhere, the elevator lights went out, and I started to hear children laughing. But this was not the type of place where children would be. My heart started beating faster and faster and harder. Then all of a sudden, I passed out. As I woke up, I noticed that I could not move or talk. I thought to myself, not sleep paralysis again. Then the lights started to flicker on and off, and then all of a sudden, I see a black figure to the left of me in the corner of the elevator, crouching down, smiling at me. I tried to scream, but nothing would come out. I tried to move, but I couldn't. A guy came over the loudspeaker and told me there was an electrical short and that he would have me out soon. There's a camera in the elevator, so to the security guard it looked like I was just laying there. I guess they figured I was drunk, being that it's New Year's. Anyways, every attempt to scream or move, that figure would just start laughing at me and pointing. This whole time the lights are flickering. Then all of a sudden, I can hear the huge crowds counting down for New Year's. 10. The dark figure is staring at me, and now with a menacing smile, with 10 fingers up. 9. He's still looking at me with 9 fingers up, and he's moving closer. 8. He was still looking at me with 8 fingers up, and he's closer. 7. The same thing. 6. The same thing. 5. The same thing. 4. He's drooling, and he's much closer. 3. He's closer. 2. He was closer. Then the lights quit flickering, and it was pitch black. Then all of a sudden, outside went silent again. I felt breathing in my right ear. And then out of nowhere I hear 1. I couldn't breathe. The light started to flicker again, and then the figure was on my chest. And all of a sudden it was gone. And I can talk and move again. Usually when I have sleep paralysis, something bad happens. Once I got out of the elevator an hour later, I found out that there was a brawl during the countdown on the rooftop bar that I was at, and 4 people were killed by some maniac who was waiting until the end of the countdown to start hacking up people with a machete. Ever since then, I have not had a sleep paralysis episode.
I was on a road trip with my friend Tom throughout upstate New York. On our second night of driving, we were taking some peaceful back road through the woods because we were tired of the noisy highway. So as we were driving down this narrow, dilapidated road, Tom suddenly really needed to use the bathroom. I asked him if he could hold it, but he said that if he held it any longer, his bladder would explode. So I just sighed and tried to find like a gas station or something. There was nothing to be seen though, so I was thinking about pulling over and letting him piss in the woods, but finally I saw lights cutting through the darkness up ahead. It was a 7-Eleven, thank God. Before I'd even parked the car, Tom flew out the door and raced inside. I realized while waiting in the dark car I was actually hungry, so I pulled out some change from my pocket. It would at least be enough for a bag of crappy Cheetos or something. So then I went inside. As I was walking through the store examining everything on the shelves, I felt a tingly feeling on my neck, like I was being watched. I turned around and saw a bearded man in a yellow suit casually slip into the other aisle. I rolled my eyes, picked up a bag of Cheez-Its, purchased them, and walked back to my car, looking at the dark woods behind the 7-Eleven. Tom had been gone forever, so I texted him and he told me he was just finishing taking a huge shit, which was classic Tom. I was just crunching on my Cheez-Its when I heard somebody go, "Psst. Psst." I quickly looked around but saw nobody. Over here. Finally, I spotted a man peeking his head around a tree in the dark woods. His face was all dirty, and he had glassy eyes. We stood staring at each other for what seemed like the longest time, until he said, "Come over here. I want to show you something." Hell no. I got in my car and locked the doors, texting Tom to hurry the fuck up. I told him there was a creepy weirdo outside the car, and he was all like, "Alright, be right over." Later on, he walked out the doors and climbed into the car, and I hit the gas to get as far away from that fucking place as possible. As we were driving, I looked back one last time in the rearview mirror and saw 3 cloaked, bulky men standing in the trees surrounding the 7-Eleven. Needless to say, I still have no idea what the hell was going on at that place, nor do I ever want to find out.
It was around 5:30 p.m. I was walking in the street to my dormitory since my home is far away from my school. There were only 3 to 5 people passing by that street at that time. While walking, I was texting my boyfriend, asking him if I could come over that night since I have a project to make and my laptop's being an ass. It won't turn on, so I was hoping I could borrow his laptop. And then, when I looked up, there was an old man walking towards me. The street was narrow, so I stopped and moved away to the side to make room for him when he did the same. I nervously laughed and moved to the other side, and he copied me again. This time, I felt a bit nervous. Excuse me, I muttered. I tried to get away from him, but he kept blocking my direction. Then he laughed and moved away. I felt relieved. I quickly walked past him, and then he stomped his feet behind me. I got startled, and then he laughed. I thought he was just a crazy old man. I told my boyfriend about it, and he asked me if I was okay, so I told him not to worry. Around 7 p.m., I was at the jeepney stop waiting for a jeepney to arrive because I was going to my boyfriend's apartment since it was 45 minutes and 2 rides away. 30 or 45 minutes later, there was one jeepney with only 5 passengers. So I hopped in. One by one, the passengers got off the jeepney until I was the only one left. "Drop me off by the terminal, please," I said. He didn't say a word, just kept on driving. When we finally got into the terminal, he didn't stop. Just drop me off here, please," I told him again. Then I saw his face in the rearview mirror. It was the crazy man from earlier. I panicked. He was looking at me, smiling. I immediately called my boyfriend, since we don't have 911 here. He wasn't picking up. I didn't know what to do. Should I jump off the Jeep? Then suddenly a group of friends halted the Jeep and he stopped. I immediately got off and ran. I might have looked like a maniac to those teenagers, but I didn't care. I called my boyfriend again, who finally picked up. He had just got off from school, and I told him everything. He picked me up where I was, and since then he never let me travel at night.
I've been followed by creeps before, and in one case was almost assaulted. I was never truly scared about that type of stuff. I've been through a lot in my life, and I consider myself to be pretty strong. Even when some creep attempted to assault me, I wasn't scared because I knew I was gonna beat his ass, and I did. I never feel threatened unless I get my gut feeling. I know when something bad's gonna happen, or if someone is a shady character, etc. My friends tell me I have some type of sixth sense. I'm not one for superstition, but I also have to agree it gets really weird and I'm almost always right. One day, I got the worst gut feeling I ever had in my life. I was in my first year of college, living in some very nice apartments. I loved living there. It was a Friday and I needed to head to the bank before it closed because I forgot to cash in my check beforehand. I left my house, locked the door, and started heading towards my car. Right as I left the hallway of my apartment complex and started walking, a beat-up rusty truck pulled up as if on cue. There were two guys inside. One was a pretty big guy with tattoos and looked like he just got out of prison, and the other one was super skinny with glasses. The second I laid my eyes on them, I had my gut feeling kick in. It was worse than usual and I immediately felt like shit. The big guy was driving and started to tell me things like, "You're so beautiful, come over here, let's talk. You're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen." I didn't want to walk to my car because I didn't want them to know what car I drive, and I didn't want to walk back to my house because I lived on the first floor, which is easier to break into, and if they didn't know already where I lived, I wanted to keep them from finding out. So I started walking to the front office of the apartment complex, which was a little far away. I already had my pocket knife out, but hidden in my sweater sleeve. They kept calling out, trailing me as I walked to the office. I kept my eye on them so I knew what they were up to. They eventually asked me to go to a party with them. The big guy said, "We're having a party at 2 a.m. at a friend's house who lives here. Wanna come? We can all hang out beforehand and get to know each other before we go." It was around 3:30 p.m. at the time, just for your information. I ignored them and told them, "No, stop bothering me." They kept trying to persuade me by saying nice things and stuff, and eventually they both said, "If you come with us, we'll give you a free pair of shoes." The skinny guy then leans back and starts digging around the back seat. I stopped to look because I wanted to make sure he wasn't gonna grab a gun or duct tape or some shit like that. I was a good few feet away from the truck and took a running position just in case. He pulls out a dark blue suitcase from the back seat and opens it. Inside there are maybe 100 different pairs of shoes. The sizing ranged from a small pink Dora the Explorer shoe to an adult-sized woman's stilettos. That's the moment where my gut feeling went into a frenzy. My knees became so weak I threw up on the spot. I've never felt so sick and felt so disgusted in my entire life. I felt pure evil. I screamed no, and they became extremely angry and began to get out of the car. I booked it. In the street, my neighbor's little kids were playing outside. I snatched them up and ran all the way to the front office. No way I was gonna leave these little kids behind with some fucking freaks. The minute we got there, I told the front office, and they called the cops, and I called the kid's mother. I told them that her kids were with me and not to leave the house in case they were still out there. I didn't want them to find out where she lived either. After that, for the next few days, I was terrified to leave my house. So terrified I had my friend come and stay with me for about a week. On the fourth day, we were getting ready to leave to go get food. And while I was locking the door, my friend said, "That's a shitty looking truck." I turned around, and it was those guys in the truck right in front of my house. We ran back inside. Apparently they had been stalking out my place for a while. They were never caught, and I never saw them again after the apartments cracked down on security. I learned about serial killers in school and found out some take trophies of their victims. I always thought back and wondered, what if all those shoes were trophies? Needless to say, I no longer live there.
When I was 17, I didn't have a driver's license. Most of the time I walked or hitchhike. There was this one night. There weren't that many cars on the road, and it was very cold. And this man pulled over. When the guy pulled over, I took a good look at the guy and figured I could take him if he tried anything. He was on the slender side and had a strange frailness about him, even though he looked healthy enough. I got into the car after we agreed on the destination. We exchanged names and I warmed my fingers off in front of the heating group. He spoke quietly, asking a few questions along the lines of, was I local and how did I like living there? He said he only been here for a few months, but found it beautiful and hoped he could find happiness there. That comment struck me as a little odd, but I brushed it off. It began to snow and the road quickly got slippery. So he slowed and he kept his eyes straight out the windshield, driving silently. I was okay with that, as small talk was never my forte. About 10 minutes later, I noticed the car near the intersection we were approaching seemed to be sliding, so I said, "Watch out." He immediately hit the gas, shooting through the intersection and burst out with, "Don't ever scream at me." Needless to say, I was taken aback. I said, "Look, this is close enough. Just pull over here and I can get there." He didn't seem to hear me. So I said, "Richard, did you hear me? I said you can pull over here and let me out." But no response. He just stared straight ahead, driving faster now than he did when it started snowing. To say I was scared doesn't seem to cover the depth of the fear that began to rise in me. I didn't know if I should stay quiet or speak, but I was damn sure not going to yell after his outburst. After about a mile, he began to mumble under his breath. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying, but I assumed he was speaking to me. So I said, "What did you say? I couldn't hear you." He began to speak quietly and rapidly, saying things like, "You're always yelling at me. I've told you time and time again, do not yell at me. I don't appreciate it. No, you don't listen, you don't listen." And I was just sitting there looking at him. I was at a complete loss. I didn't know what to say in response or if I should say anything at all. I contemplated just jumping out of the car, but nixed that idea when I realized the door lock was missing. There was just a silver-lined hole where it should have been. I started to cry and debate with myself about causing an accident by grabbing the wheel and hoping for the best, when he suddenly looked at me for the first time since I had gotten in the car. He blinked several times, rapidly, then slowed the car, pulling into a gas station. I waited to see if he unlocked the doors, not wanting to say anything to set him off again. After a minute or two, he quietly said, "I think I better let you out of here." And he hit the button to the door locks, and he opened the door. I wasn't about to hesitate, so I jumped out of the car as if I were on fire. I was about to turn and walk into the gas station when he called my name. He looked so damn sad and I hesitated. He apologized, said he was sorry if he had frightened me, that he never would have harmed me. And he asked if I'd be able to get home okay. I said I would and closed the door. He began to pull out of the gas station, but stopped suddenly. He just sat there for a couple of moments, his head down. I froze, wondering what the hell was up, and was about to run into the gas station, but he opened his window and yelled at me, waving something in his hand, my hat. I left it on his seat. I slowly approached the side of his car, and he handed it to me, apologizing again. I didn't know what else to say, so I just said, "Thanks." I watched as he drove off, making sure he was out of sight before moving on so he wouldn't know which direction I was heading. As I walked, I went to put my hat back on, and a piece of paper fell out of it. Folded into a paper was a $100 bill. The paper said, "I'm sorry. Please take a cab and don't hitchhike anymore tonight." I didn't. In fact, it was the last time I ever hitchhiked in my life. Will never, ever do that again.
It was April 1st, 2001. I was at home watching TV when I heard a big bang on my back door. I didn't know who or what it was. Thought it was a raccoon or something. so I kept watching TV. I will never forget what I heard. Someone whispered, "I am coming for you." I turned to see who it was, but no one was there. I went outside and yelled, "Who's there?" I went back inside, and then I saw it. It was a man with a white rabbit mask holding a kitchen knife. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife and turned on the light. The guy took off his mask, and it was my friend, Fred. I was relieved, and he yelled, "April Fools!" I asked how he managed to get so far when he whispered in my ear. He looked confused. To my surprise, he said, "I never whispered in your ear." That's when I knew something was in my house. I told Fred to hide and call the cops. When the cops got there, they saw a man with long black hair robbing stuff from my house. He had a pistol and some pocket knives. The cops told me he had broke out of prison a couple days before the incident.
This event happened when I was around 13 years old. I was going on a family road trip with my parents and siblings. My brother was 16 at the time and my half-sister was 21. I don't completely remember where we were going or where we stayed since it was almost 15 years ago. All I remember was that we rented a cottage in a small village. Next to the village was a lot of mountains surrounding the perimeter, and there were probably only 20 houses in the village. Next to the cottage was a small lake that was big enough to kayak in, and to the right of the little lake was a small shed. The shed was very old, and its ceiling had been poorly repaired. There was ivy growing all over it. Although this may not seem scary, the door was wide open and the place we were staying at was all fenced off with a really high fence. This probably meant that no one would be able to come into our property. Later that same day, my brother and I decided to check it out since we had nothing else to do other than swim in the lake before dinner. Bear in mind, this happened in the winter, meaning it would get dark much earlier than in the summer. We walked up towards the shed, and as we walked towards it, we realized that a source of light was shining through the ceiling. It didn't seem like it was a normal ceiling light, but was almost like a torch. We saw the light slowly move around in between the cracks of the shed. Then, in one sudden motion, the light randomly pointed at us. My brother and I were petrified by the situation. We both looked at each other with blank expressions. Our parents were in the lounge watching TV, so they wouldn't be able to hear us at all if we cried out for help. I don't like to be cliché, but my big brother is a very strong person, emotionally, physically, and mentally. So I was surprised when I saw his lower lip tremble out of the corner of my eye. I thought he was going to protect me by telling me what to do, but instead he just stood there, frozen, like me, with a petrified face as the bright light blinded us through the gaps between the walls of the shed for what felt like an eternity. Suddenly, the light switched off. A small sense of relief hit me as the light turned off, but I was still scared for my life. Because the light was shining on our faces for so long, our eyes were not used to the dark. When we tried to escape by running in the opposite direction towards the cottage, we couldn't see where we were going. Then, as if the situation couldn't get any worse, we heard a loud shuffling sound coming from the shed. We could hear the sound starting to crescendo as we ran silently towards the cottage. The sound was getting louder and louder. Soon after, I could just make out a hollow voice coming from behind us. I hesitantly looked behind me. To my horror, I saw a middle-aged man standing next to the shed with a flashlight in his hand. His hands were covered in what looked like blood, and his hair was greasy as if he never showered once in his life. He had a long beard that looked tangled and disgusting. In a faint voice, he said, "Come here, child. I have many toys in here. Do you want to play some games with me?" He said this with a creepy smile and eyes wide open without blinking. He looked as if he was talking to me. I instantly screamed as loud as I could, and my brother grabbed my hand with dear life as we sprinted back into the cottage. We told our parents what happened, and I hugged my brother and sister with tearful eyes. They didn't believe us at first because they were so shocked by the situation and so confused. But when they saw the monstrous man's face pressed up against the window with a bloody butcher's knife in his hand, they screamed in horror and immediately called the police. The police were nearby since it was a small town, but as the sirens came, we saw the man run back to his shed, and unfortunately, they never caught him. They asked us what he looked like and what he said to us. The police told us that a girl that looked similar to me and was roughly the same age as me was murdered last month because of that man we saw from the shed. I can't imagine what would have happened if we stayed in a busy town that weekend, or if the police didn't make it in time. I am now scared to go near sheds after that incident, and I will never be the same. A situation like this has not happened since, but I really hope that man is either caught or is being chased by the police, because those few moments scarred me for life.
I am a 16-year-old girl. Years ago, in the summer, I left my place in the city to visit my aunt and uncle's house in the suburbs of New Jersey. I mainly went to hang out with my cousin. Let's call her Kate. My cousin and I are 3 years apart. My aunt and uncle both worked in Manhattan. One day, my aunt and uncle decided to attend a party after work. During the day, Kate and I went down to the street to her friend's house because they had a pool. We spent all day swimming. When we walked back to her house, it was around 4 p.m. It was still sunny out. All of a sudden, Kate's phone stopped working. Nothing to worry about. I still had mine and it was brand new. We spent another hour outside and figured it was time to call my aunt to tell her we were okay. On the steps, I pulled my phone out, but it was not working. We took the battery out, put it back in, but still nothing. With no way to call my aunt, we just went inside the house. It was maybe 5 p.m. Kate's older sister, Julie, a high schooler, was spending the night at her friend's house, so we were all alone. In the living room, we put the 2 sofas together as we normally did when I slept over. We were both tired and ready to sleep. We had been left alone like this a lot of times, so it didn't faze us. The house is big and gets pitch black. All of a sudden, we heard a big bang that sounded like brass or metal coming from across the hall. We got up and checked Kate's room. Nothing had fallen. We went back to the living room to sleep. Maybe 2 hours later, we heard another bang coming from the room. We checked again. Nothing had fallen. This time, we were a little unnerved. We went back but stayed up, then shortly heard a bang a third time coming from the same room. We were nervous. We went on opposite sides of the hallway and walked in the room, this time like a little SWAT team. Everything was intact. We couldn't sleep after. We stayed up on the sofas and saw a shadow coming from the basement. The basement had no door. It was just open. No one was home yet. We called out for Kate's parents, and if they were home, they would have said something. Their driveway was empty. Their car wasn't there. We were terrified. Kate and I grabbed knives, and we just stayed down on the kitchen floor. Nothing happened. After another hour, we went back to the sofas. We woke up to the sound of a girl screaming, "Help me!" We sprang up and heard someone banging on the door, but we were too petrified because we saw another shadow next to the shadow from earlier. Terrified, we just made sure the door was locked and went back to the sofa. After 30 minutes, we were woken up again, but this time to a police car and ambulance lights coming through from the living room windows. We were exhausted and went back to sleep. Sometime during the early morning, Kate's parents came home. We were sleeping and heard a huge bang coming from Kate's room. This time, my uncle came up from the basement, which is where my aunt and uncle's room was. He was holding one of his metal bats. He was ready to protect us. With my uncle in front of us, we all went into the room. Nothing was on the ground and nothing had fallen. We knew we weren't crazy because even Kate's parents heard it. We never could explain what happened that night. The next morning, both Kate and my phone started working. After that day, I hated going to their house. I believe their house is haunted. Either that or someone was trying to come inside because they knew their car wasn't in the driveway and they thought they could break in.
My name is Jasmine. One night my girlfriend and I were getting ready because we were going to head out for a night of fun. We got in the car and I don't know what got into us, but we were feeling very flirty and decided to park at a parking lot to do our thing. We were in the car doing our thing. I was on her in the driver's seat while she had the seat reclined. When we were moving around, I accidentally honked the horn with my butt. I looked at my girlfriend and told her, "Hope that didn't draw any attention to us." She said, "It's okay. It's like 1 a.m. I doubt anyone is awake." So we continued. I kid you not. 3 minutes later, I put my head up to fix my hair and looked to my right. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a man on his knees, just watching us. I quickly jumped off my girlfriend into the passenger side, screamed and told her to drive off. As my girlfriend was trying to figure out how to put the seat up, the man got up and put his hands up. I got the most sickening feeling when I saw his hands were covered in blood. My girlfriend quickly locked the car door and got ready to drive off. Then the man told us, "Don't panic." I told my girlfriend to step on it, and when she did, I just remember looking back, seeing his face get all mad and quickly walk away from the area. As we were driving off, I was sitting there asking myself if he murdered someone. Could he be hurt? So my girlfriend decided to drive back to see what the fuck happened. I didn't want to, but I thought maybe he needed help. When my girlfriend and I went back, we saw 2 cop cars pass the area, coming from different directions. We were looking at each other, trying to figure out what was going on. When we drove back into the parking lot, he was gone. I don't know what he needed or why he had blood on his hands, but ever since that night, I always made sure my car door is locked. And now I carry a taser with me. This happened 2 months ago in January of 2019. My parents went out to a party. They told me they wouldn't be back until at least 3 a.m. in the morning because the party was supposed to start at 8 p.m. and the party was going to be in New Jersey. We live in Connecticut, so it takes a while to get there and back. They told me to watch my 10-year-old brother and expected me to be responsible because I'm 15 years old. When they left, we watched movies all night while eating a bunch of popcorn. It was around 11:30, and we just finished watching Infinity War. I told my brother to brush his teeth and go to bed. I stayed up later than him to watch the movie Logan. The movie ended, and it was around 2 in the morning. I was getting ready for bed when my brother came down the stairs. I asked him what he was still doing up, and he said the boogeyman was in his closet and wanted to touch him. I looked at him in confusion. My brother isn't the type of kid to pull pranks or joke around. He wanted me to check it out. I said fine and started saying he probably just heard a house noise. He said he heard a noise coming from his closet, and when he checked inside, the boogeyman was there and said he wanted to touch him. We went inside his room. I turned on the light and we went to the closet door. I opened it, and what I saw made me seriously angry. There was a tall, scruffy-looking man with long, black, greasy hair. He looked as if he was in his mid-40s and was fairly built. I was pissed off when I saw this creep watching my 10-year-old brother sleep, and I figured out what my brother meant when he said the boogeyman wanted to touch him. I was so pissed off. I punched his throat. He dropped to the floor gasping for air, but I stepped on his face as hard as I could at least 6 times. He was covered in blood and was having trouble breathing. I grabbed my brother and ran into the bathroom, locking the door and calling the cops. Then I called my parents. My parents freaked out. In about 10 minutes, the cops showed up and searched the bedroom. He wasn't in there. They searched the house. He wasn't anywhere to be found. I gave them a good description of his appearance, and an officer even stayed at our house until sunrise. A week later, I was informed that the same guy was caught and arrested for raping an 11-year-old boy and murdering his parents. It turns out he had raped multiple children before and even murdered some of them and their parents. He was 47 years old and received a death sentence. If my brother never came downstairs to tell me what happened, then I fear the worst could have happened to him. And I'm extremely thankful that didn't happen. When I was 4 years old, my family and I used to live in a huge apartment. Along with the apartment complex was a huge basement where we could do our laundry. However, in order to get there, we had to take the elevator. One day, my mom was doing the laundry. My brothers and I accompanied her. My two brothers were playing together. Meanwhile, I was wandering off to the dark basement's hallway. As I walked in further, I saw bloody footprints that were the same size as my feet. I followed the footsteps, and they suddenly stopped at the end of the hallway. I looked up and I saw two kids, a boy with brown hair and brown eyes and a girl with blonde hair and brown eyes. They were both my age. There was something odd about them, but like any other 5-year-old, I just ignored it. I turned my head around to see if there was anyone else in the hallway, but there wasn't. As I turned my head around to look at the kids again, they vanished. I was confused. I mean, how could that be possible? There was only a wall in front of me. A few days later, I was getting into the elevator. As soon as I entered, I saw the kids again. I asked them where their mom and dad were, but they didn't respond. I turned around and I pressed the button to go to the 3rd floor, and as I turned back to them, again, they were gone. I was shocked, so I told the janitor about what happened. Apparently, there was a horrible situation some time ago. A family used to live here, and the parents killed their own children. Now their ghosts haunt the whole complex in search for their bodies. Several years have passed, and we moved out. But I still wonder if they ever ended up finding their bodies.
When I was about 9 years old, I was in my swimsuit, ready to go to swimming lessons. My brother and I had made a pillow fort, and it was still there from the night before. I had crawled underneath the coffee table, where a blanket went over it, blocking out the outside world. I have no idea why I stuck my foot outside of the blanket, but I did. A dark black sock crawled creepily towards my foot and slowly slid over it. The sock was cold, and I felt odd. I recognized the sock. It looked just like the one my mom had. I called out my mom's name and my brother's name, but there was no response, only silence. I walked to the window, but when I looked out, there was nothing out of the ordinary. I saw my cat staring at me with a weird look on her face. Then, I was horrified when I heard the shower running upstairs. My mom was still in the shower, and my dad was at work. I ran up the stairs to find my brother spinning on the chair in my parents' room. I asked him if he went downstairs, and he told me he had nothing to do with the situation. I told my mom what had happened, but she didn't believe me. She said that I was probably hallucinating and that it was just the cat. But I know what I saw, and the look on my cat's face is still fresh in my memory.
When I was 7 or 8 years old, my parents used to take me to this beach cafe in our town. It had a pool and the cafe was right next to the beach. The family that owned the cafe were my family's close friends, so I spent a lot of my childhood there. The best part about the beach is that when you passed the cafe and the playground, there was a lot of sand and a net for volleyball. As kids, my friends and I would always play there. One ordinary summer night, there was quite a few of us playing in the sand, making castles and doing other things. All of a sudden, I heard a noise behind me in the bushes, right where the sand ended. I should mention that there were woods around the whole place, but it wasn't deep or anything. I was a brave kid, so I just brushed it off as being a cat or animal of some sort, and continued to play. However, when I looked up at my friends, who were now quiet and staying still, I got the chills. I noticed that all of their eyes had widened. They were staring at me, or rather at whatever was behind me. The shock kicked in, and I felt like I was going to faint. I started shaking. I didn't even want to turn around. But when I felt something cold on the back of my neck, that was the last straw. I started running full speed towards the cafe filled with people, and my friends immediately followed behind me. There were 6 children crying and screaming at the top of our lungs. I remember finally clinging to my mom and crying in her arms. Soon after, the sound of sirens followed by police cars parked in front filled the air. When the adults talked to the police, my friends and I were confused. I still didn't know what was behind me, so I asked my oldest friend in the group, who was 10 years old and talking to his dad. It turns out there was this crazy old guy who robbed a lady and stabbed her to death not so far away from here. My friends told me he appeared behind me smiling like a sick clown. He was holding a knife and pressing it against the back of my neck. That must have been the cold thing I felt. From then on, I never stayed far away from the cafe when the sun went down. And thankfully, they caught the guy. I'm scared of the dark, and I have a good reason for it. You might be thinking, so? Almost everyone is scared of the dark because something happened to them. Well, that is true for me too. Here's my story. About 2 years ago, I ran away from home. I don't know just what I was thinking at the time, but I left with no food, no water, no belongings, and no coat. It was a very rainy day, and I sensed that I should either find shelter or I'd be soaking wet. So I decided to walk to my school and stay there for a few hours to dry off, as I was already wet and cold on a rainy day. As I arrived, I laid down my head and quickly fell asleep. And when I woke up, it was pitch black outside, and I could barely make out anything. I didn't have a watch or anything that tells the time, so I assumed it was midnight. At least it stopped raining, I thought. I decided to just go back home, as I wasn't far and I was very hungry that time. As I got up, I stopped. There was something in front of me, under a streetlight, about 50 yards away. It was a man about 6 feet tall, and he was wearing a black coat with a hoodie over his face, so I couldn't see his face. At first, I thought it was my dad who had come to look for me, so I felt relief. But I didn't want to get into trouble, so I hid in a bush nearby and peeked out. The man was standing there and looked around for what it seemed like a half an hour. Then, under the light of the streetlight, he pulled something out of his pocket. I couldn't make it out at first, but then I realized it was a kitchen knife. Then he started to run toward the bushes. No, towards me. Exactly. I grew frightened and sprinted out of the bushes like an arrow. He already knew I was there. I didn't stop running until I got home without ever looking back. So I survived. But to this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I didn't run on that day. Or worse, what would have happened if I didn't wake up at the school? I developed my fear of the dark from this incident. It's so bad that now I have to sleep with a nightlight or the hallway light occasionally, because I'm afraid that the man whom I saw will kill me or kidnap me someday if I don't turn the light on. My name is Max. I live in the center of the city now, but a few years back I lived in an old house on a somewhat sketchy street. But that doesn't mean I was poor. The house was ugly from outside, and it was built before World War II, but clean, warm, and cozy inside, although many people died in it there. I always believed in ghosts because of all the weird incidents that happened. Like one time, at night, me and my mom were sitting in a room. It was pitch black outside the room we sat in. Suddenly, we heard someone was tripping over, falling in the kitchen. We also heard things like plates fall down and shatter. But when we walked outside, nothing was there. Everything was in its place, and we were so scared about what was going on. A few years later, I had a dream. Me and my mom were walking down a path, and suddenly we stopped, and I heard a voice saying, "Bridge." I felt something knocking on my back 3 times, and I woke up scared. Nothing was there, so I didn't think of it that much and went back to sleep. However, after that night, this dream appeared again and again. The voice said various things that I don't remember, and one time it said something about my mom's death. It always ended with something knocking on my back 3 times. It was creepy. One time, me and my mom sat in a room and talked about ghosts, and I told her about what I'd been dreaming. Mom went silent for a second, and she confided in me that once she was sitting with a friend, and he said something not too nice to her, just for fun. She got angry and screamed, "Shut up," in a male voice, and she didn't remember that. When she described the voice, it reminded me that the voice sounded just like the voice in my dreams. In 2017, she passed away because of cancer. She died in the same room, in the same house where I got those nightmares. After that, I moved out to another place a few years ago. So I don't live in that house anymore. But I still believe in ghosts, that they exist, and they are real.
The Creepy Stalker. On Saturday at 11:30 a.m., I invited my friend Sophia to come to my house, just a general hangout. She came to my house at 12:25 and everything was going normal when we was talking in my room. As we were hungry then, we decided to go out, so we bought some snacks and walked to the park, which is next to the shops. When we about to leave from the park and just walked across the road, I saw a white car. I thought it was passing by, but the car just slowed down next to me and one guy opened the window. He was almost 35 to 40-year-old Pakistani man. He asked me, "Are you okay?" with a perverted grin. Then he said to me, come here, I want to talk to you." And I said no, while looking at the back seat of the car to see if he has anyone with him that will harm us. But luckily, he didn't. The guy said, "Please, I want to talk to you," while he was licking his fingers and staring at me. Then he made such a nasty hand gesture. I felt very angry and disgusted. Sophia whispered to me, "Let's go, he's creep." As me and my friend walked away from the car and went to a different path, which is next to the shops, he followed us and parked next to me again. Then saying, "Why won't you speak to me? Come on, speak to me. Come here, please." Out of anger, I yelled and said, "Leave me alone, you weirdo." Then we saw him with a very evil and perverted smile. I grabbed Sophia's arm and ran inside the shop and hiding. I was calling my other friend Jahim and told him briefly what's going on. He kept saying, "Call the police," but I thought it would be alright. Few more minutes later, we left the shop and walked on the same path as that was the quickest way to go to my home. We thought everything was okay until she turned around and screamed, "He's following us!" There was the same white car. So scared. My legs were shaking as we ran, and while I was running, I told Jahim on the phone, "He's following us!" and then said, "Go to the spider park." It was a small park that no car can park as there was houses around and which was right next to my house. I shouted, "Sophia, hide!" She hid behind the wall while I was hiding another place. As a result, the guy was still following but couldn't find us. He was roaming around the area. When he disappeared, we went towards the park from a small gate and finally went back to my place. Once we arrived home, I told my family everything that happened and phoned the police, but the police didn't do anything about it. They just said, "We will use it as intel and update you, but we can't do anything right now," which made us feel so sad. However, The most scary thing came up next by Sophia, who reminded me suddenly about the incident I've told her a week ago. She said, "What if it is the same guy?" I said, "What do you mean?" Then she said, "You know, when you told me about the guy who knocked on your window while you was trying to sleep." My mind froze. It was 3:00 a.m. in the morning. Luckily, I had curtains so he wouldn't see me, but I never forget the moment looking at the end of the curtain where the window was showing clearly and seeing a guy arm knocking on my window. I remember rubbing my eyes to make sure that I wasn't imaging some demons, but no matter how much I rubbed my eyes, the figure of the mysterious guy arm was still there. From that day on, I just stayed in my room feeling very scared for about 2 weeks. What if he was the same guy knocking on my window?
When I was 7, I had a really scary experience that I will never forget. I got up at 8 a.m., as usual, but as I stood up, I noticed something was different. It was very cold, and I felt like someone was watching me. When I turned to my sister's bed, she woke up, and I screamed. 2 heads hovered in the air, one of an older woman with long, dark hair and green eyes, the other of a bald older man with blue eyes. I screamed again and ran to my mother. I told her what happened and saw some man at the door. I can't recall what he looked like, but I screamed and hugged my mother when I saw him. I was crying at this point, and she looked at me as I pointed to the door, not explaining why. She instantly knew what I was upset about, and she spoke in the direction of the door. I don't know what she said. I was just too scared to listen, and all I wanted was to be somewhere else. Nothing like this happened to me again, until I was 13. I was coming from my friend's house and was really tired. I went to my room, turned the lights off, and went to bed. At 4 a.m., I suddenly woke up without a reason. When I looked at the door, I saw my mother looking at my sister. She had lifeless eyes, which reminded me of the incident that happened when I was 7 years old. The heads had the same lifeless eyes as my mother, except her eyes were red and just looked evil. I knew it wasn't my mom. I hid under the blanket, praying that the thing would just go away. When I looked up, it was still there. I prayed again. Then it vanished. I mean, literally vanished. I saw it with my own eyes. That thing grew fainter and fainter until I couldn't see it anymore. When it was gone, I ran to my parents and explained what happened. They believed me and said that if I couldn't go to sleep, I could watch TV or just stay up. I thanked them and went to the living room. Now, I'm 14, and I talked to my mother about the incident that happened 7 years ago. And when I told her what the heads looked like, she seemed very surprised and confused. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me that the description I gave perfectly matched that of my dead grandparents. I don't know if they were really my grandparents, or who that man on the door was.
It happened just a few years ago. When I was hanging out at my cousin's apartment, there was a building in front of the living room window. That night, we were having so much fun and having a fun conversation. It was 7 p.m. and we noticed that there was an open curtain in the building just a few feet across from our apartment. I got up in my seat just to take a quick look at that window. I was just curious. Then I saw a woman. At first, I couldn't see her face because her hair was blocking it. Then I told this to my cousin. He was shocked about what I said. He told me to get his binoculars. Then he used them to look. Suddenly, he screamed in fear. I asked him why. He said, "What the heck is that?" Then I got the binoculars and then I looked. My heart was pounding so hard. I saw a dead woman. Her neck was bleeding. Her blood was dripping on her yellow dress and her body was hanging from the small chandelier. My cousin has military experience. and he got up the courage to go into that room. Before we went into that room, we told the guard what was there. So we had 2 guards following us, and I told the one guard to follow me to our room so he could see what was in that window, and he was shocked too. He was shocked. He radioed to his fellow guard that was with my cousin, and then we followed them to the next building. We also called the cops. When the police arrived, we struggled opening the door. When we got there, we all turned on the lights, and everything in there was all messed up. We opened the bedroom, and we saw the dead body hanging from the chandelier. 2 weeks later, the murderer was caught, and the police gave us a reward for helping to solve a case. However, to this day, I will always remember the horror we experienced.
So I'm a nurse, and I was driving home from work one night. The roads were deserted, and it was freezing that night. I don't live far from work, maybe a couple of miles. I'm driving down a residential street around the corner from my house, and I see a man laying face down in the street. Once again, I'm a nurse, so my first thought was, great, gotta help this guy. I was coming off of a long shift, and falls happen all the time. As I slowed down the car, I suddenly realized what an idiot move it was. I'm a 100-pound woman and I don't carry a weapon. I thought I should do something to help this guy, so I called 911 as I drove past him and slowed to a stop at the end of the block. While I was stopped at the light, I explained to the dispatcher that there was a man in the road who might need assistance. All of a sudden, I hear a loud bang, bang from the driver's side window. I screamed and I looked over. A man was pounding on my window and jiggling the handle of my locked door. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that there was no man laying in the street anymore. Still on the phone with 911, I screamed, "I'm so scared," to the dispatcher and floored it through the red light. I quickly told him what had happened, and even though I was right by my house, he told me to keep driving. After a few minutes, I had calmed down and he told me to loop back around. I pulled over down the road from my house and I stayed in the car. I didn't see the man anywhere, so I got off the phone with the dispatcher, who told me he was sending a police car to cruise the area. As I gather up my things, I do a final scan of the area, and I see the man. He is walking with 2 other men. I hunched way down in my car until they were further down the road, then bolted into my house. I don't know if he had ill intent, but it freaks me the hell out that he wasn't alone. Just always, always lock your doors.
This story happened when I was in the 9th grade. I was going home after being at my friend's apartment. He's one of my good friends, so I often visited him. It was about 9 p.m. at night. Usually I went home at 5 or 6 when I visited him, but it was final exam week, so I went home later than usual to prepare for it together. He lives on the 15th floor. I took the freight elevator down because it was quicker than the passenger elevator. The elevator is kind of old, shaky, and not really well maintained. The fan isn't working, the walls are rusty, full of graffiti, and the light flickers, as you would expect from an old building's elevator. At the moment, there were 3 or 4 people with me going down to the lobby. The elevator went down normally. Then, suddenly, at the 9th floor, the door opened. I saw one of my other friends. Her name is Billy. She was playing, laughing with some kids who I assumed to be her friends. Then she looked at me and smiled. I stared at her for a moment, but I didn't reply to her because, well, we're not that close. Nothing came to mind to say. So the elevator closed back up and took me to the lobby. But soon, I realized that no one that was on the elevator with me seemed to notice those kids, despite the loud laughter they made. But once again, I didn't care about it, so I went back home and rested. The day after, I saw Billy again. Out of curiosity, I asked her, "Hey, why were you playing so late at night? Why didn't you stay at home?" She looked confused, as if I was asking her a random question. She then asked me, "Well, what do you mean? I didn't go anywhere yesterday. I was at my house." I was a bit confused, and I couldn't believe what she just said. She then asked me again, what was I wearing yesterday? I answered, you wore a white t-shirt, right? I was hoping that she would say yes, but she said no. I felt my heart dropping. If it wasn't her that I saw last night, then who? A few days later, as usual, I was visiting my friend and went home late again. I waved goodbye to him as I was walking the corridor. One thing came to mind. How am I going to get down? Remembering those elevator things, I took the stairs. Well, I guess it wasn't a really good decision, but at least better than that scary elevator. I walked down the dark stairwell. Once in a while, I looked at the open part, and this time, I saw a shadow figure looking out from the balcony across. It seemed normal to me, probably a person looking down, so I kept on walking. Watching my step, I looked back up again, and suddenly, the shadow figure thing disappeared into nowhere in just a blink of an eye. I was so scared thinking about how the hell did that guy disappear that quickly? By jumping down the balcony? My steps went quicker, but to my astonishment, I saw the sign 8th floor, which means I saw that figure when I was on the 9th floor. That same floor that I witnessed the ghost Billy. Soon I called my friend and told him about it. He was surprised and told me that a lot of people also said that the 9th floor is actually haunted. There was once a guy that died there, but was found rotting in his apartment room 3 days later.
A few years ago, I took my family up to the cabins by the lake because I just won a big case against some drug dealer. In the middle of the night, my wife woke me up shaking my shoulder pretty hard. She told me that someone was banging on our door. I thought to myself, why would someone come to our cabin in the middle of the night? I got up to go check the door and my wife tried to hand me my bat, but I told her I wouldn't need it. The person kept knocking and I opened the door. It was a kid standing there. I asked him, "What are you doing here?" Then he started running. So I chased after him as my wife watched. He kept running in circles, then he tripped and I grabbed him and asked him, "Why are you knocking at our door in the middle of the night?" The boy said, "'Cause my uncles told me to." I asked, "What? Why?" The boy hesitated and looked me straight in my eyes and said, "To get you out of the house." Simultaneously, I hear my wife scream out my name in horror, and I hear footsteps running right behind me. I turn around and I see 4 hooded men running toward me. I reacted so quick that I ran over the kid. I see my wife and she ran off the porch ready to swing the bat, but I yelled at her to get back inside and called the cops. The guys were chasing me and were about 15 feet behind me. I made it inside the cabin, grabbed my cell phone and I called the cops. When the police officers arrived, they noticed that those guys went through our car and stole some of my information. Who were those guys? And what would have happened if they would have caught me? I know the situation could have been worse. They could have went inside the cabin with my kids and my wife, but what did they want with me? After that night, we never went back to that cabin.
I was 15. I was at my boyfriend's house and it was about 10:30 p.m. We were sitting on his trampoline in his backyard, which faces a small park behind his house. His yard is on a ground level, about a meter above the ground level the park is on, and his fence is on that lower level. So by sitting on the trampoline, we could see out into the darkness of the park, which was just slightly illuminated by his yard lights. We're talking when suddenly I feel an eerie chill, like we're being watched, like something wants us to know we're being watched. I remember glancing all over the place, and jumping at the smallest sounds of the night. My boyfriend was laughing at me, and all before he suddenly stilled and rose up onto his knees to look at something in the park.
Hey, there's a man watching us from that tree over there.
Those words still chill me to the core. I froze and asked him to tell me what he was doing. He told me that the man was very tall, almost halfway up the tree, which was a large eucalyptus, and that only his head and shoulder were really visible, and that his eyes were glowing or reflecting the light from his yard lights. I wondered if he was lying and making fun of me again for being paranoid earlier, so I sat up and leaned over him to see the thing next to the tree. There it was. It was tall and darker than the shadows of the trees, and wasn't lit up like the trees were from the lights. Its eyes were shining brightly, and it was exceptionally tall. It couldn't be a man, if not for the shoulder and arm draped over the tree, and so it wasn't an animal either. I fell back onto the trampoline, and my boyfriend told me to be quiet and to start moving back towards the house. It was moving towards us. I shook my head. I didn't want to move. I couldn't even bring myself to move. I was frozen in fear or something. I don't know, but I remember he had to force me up, swearing loudly and telling me he was nearly at the fence. I got up and caught a glance of a figure nearly across the short distance from the trees to his yard, and I booked it to the stairs up to his front door. I glanced back to look again, and my boyfriend yelled at me not to, and that he was climbing over the fence. And I somehow moved even faster and made it to the door without tripping up the stairs and breaking a leg. He told me again it had been trying to climb over the fence when I slowed down to take a look. His family is very religious, and his father swears it was a demon trying to test their faith or something, but I don't think it was. I had another encounter maybe a month later. My boyfriend told me that a figure was watching me from exposed ceiling beams of my old barn-like house during a FaceTime call late at night. Maybe a shadow man. Maybe an Australian version of a skinwalker. I'm not really sure, and I'm 19 now, and I still can't stop thinking about what happened.
I live in the same house since my birth till I'm 18. It used to be my grandfather's house, and he gave it to his sons. We all live together, my father and his 2 brothers with their wives and children. Our grandpa passed away when I was about to born. When me and my cousins were young, our parents scared us by telling that before Grandpa bought this house, there were husband and wife been murdered and their bodies were found in our water tanks and they became ghosts now. They told us this story to keep us away from the roof and water tanks as they all go to work. At my young age, I didn't notice these paranormal stuff happening, but after I reached 11, my life changed. We all had separate room, but me and my 2 sisters shared one room. I was just watching some videos on YouTube until late at night. It was around 2:00 a.m. and my sisters were asleep on their bed. My bed was the middle and the room was pretty dark. I could see only my mobile phone, then someone just tapped my knee 3 times. I was jumped with fear. I quickly used my phone light to see who it was, but no one was there. I thought it was only my imagination, and then I covered myself with a blanket and tried to sleep. And suddenly, I saw a white shadow of both man and woman with long hairs, and a young girl. I screamed as loud as I could. Everybody woke up, but they never believed me. That night, I shared my bed with my cousin, and I started noticing that kind of stuff later on day. After that day, 2 police officers came in our house and met my father. Me, my sister, and my cousins were watching from the stairs, and the police officers told him that they were looking for the murderers of Mr. and Mrs. They said they could not found for years, so they are going to close this case. We also found out that the Mrs. was pregnant at the same time she was murdered. We were all scared. Another big incident happened last month. My mother was working in the kitchen, and I was also sitting there gossiping with her. I mentioned the case of Mr. and Mrs., and suddenly the glass table beside me was broken. I was lucky that I stood up at the right moment, but there was no explanation of how it broke. In my house, there are 18 people living, and everybody has a haunting experience every time we mention their case. We are still living in that house as nothing serious harm has happened to anybody, but I'm still afraid. I was 14 back then, and we just moved to a house my father rented because of his work, which we'll spend about 2 months in. Me and my parents were happy with how good the house looked, and quickly we unpacked our things. We spent the whole day settling in and getting a little used to the house. After I went to my room to sleep as I was fatigued from the whole moving thing. My room had a bed, a mirror, my computer, and a closet. I turned off the lights and started sleeping. In the middle of the night, I heard some sound. It was coming from my slightly opened closet. I didn't move. I just slightly opened my eyes, and what I have seen made every hair on my body stand. From the slight opening, I could see an eye opened as wide as an eye can possibly be opened, staring at me. I was terrified, and I jumped out of the bed as I let a loud scream out. I went to my parents, who were sitting in the living room. As soon as I finished telling Dad about what I had seen while Mom was holding me, he ran to my room to look in the closet. He opened the closet, but there were nothing but clothes in it. He then told me it was a nightmare and helped me back to bed. My heartbeat went back to normal, and my parents wished me a good night while leaving the room. Before leaving, Mom told me she would leave the door slightly open to let in some light to help me sleep. But after that, I couldn't close my eyes. I was too afraid to do so. Was it really my imagination? Dad checked the closet, and I know there was nothing, but I tried to calm myself to fall asleep, and indeed I did. But not before leaving my phone's camera recording and facing the now fully closed closet. I thought of it as like a third eye keeping an eye on the closet. It was morning, and I slept well despite what had happened. I noticed my phone was still recording, and I stopped the recording. After taking a shower and washing my teeth, I went to have breakfast with my parents. And we moved to the living room, so my dad was watching TV and Mom reading a magazine. I was bored, so I thought I'd check the video. I played it and speeded it up. I had my headphones on. After 3 hours of absolute silence, there was a knock. Upon hearing, I immediately slowed the video back to normal. There was another knock, and after that, the closet door started to open slowly. I fell in shock as I watched a hand being placed on the side, the closet door to fully open it. From the closet came out what looked like a nun. Her face was fully covered with a veil. I was sweating buckets, watching her approach my bed. Upon reaching my bed, she raised her veil, which revealed a surprisingly beautiful face, and started to smile while looking down upon me. Her smile was kind of warm. She now opened her teeth to reveal an excellent set of white teeth. And then her smile grew wider and wider. My eyes nearly popped of their sockets as I saw her warm expression turn into an evil and horrifying one, and her warm yellowish skin turn to a color close to the whiteness of snow. Is she going to hurt me? But that was yesterday, and I'm fine now. What cut my line of thought was the sound of footsteps of someone approaching. The nun looked towards the room's door and quickly returned to the closet before closing it behind her. That someone must have come to check up on me, and that was what saved me. After showing the video to my parents, they had a horrified expression on their faces. In that same day, we moved out the house and warned its owner, who didn't believe it even after seeing the video, which he thought was made by me to prank him. It has been a year since then, but still, it is a sleepless one to me.
My name is Kai. When I was 17, me and my friends were hanging out one night and decided to watch a movie, making some popcorn. The movie was a hilarious thing. We had a good time laughing and eating popcorn and other snacks. When the movie was done, it was around 11:30 p.m. It already turned to pitch black outside. One of my friends, we'll call him Spencer, suggested that it would be a good idea to play a game of Spotlight. Spotlight is basically hide and seek, but in the dark, and the seeker has a flashlight. Where I live, my house is in a cul-de-sac, and if you walk down a little path in the backyard, you end up at a long street. Across that street, there's a giant field that used to have a basketball court and a playground, but it's been torn down since I was 8. So now the giant field was just empty. But there were a lot of bushes and hiding spots, and even a little cornfield, which made it perfect for a game like Spotlight. So we grabbed a few flashlights and headed to the field. After playing a giant game of rock, paper, scissors, it was decided that another friend, we'll call him Braden, was going to be the seeker. So me and Spencer went to hide together in the cornfield, since it would be hard to find someone in there. While I believe 4 other friends, John, Ethan, Liam, and my brother Cameron, went to hide all separately in different places in the field. For some information that'll be needed later on in the story, Spencer was 17, John and Ethan were 16, Braden and Cameron and Liam were 14. Once me and Spencer got comfortable in the cornfields, we started just to talk about random stuff and about the movie we watched earlier. Just as I told Spencer a joke and he started laughing, I put my finger to my lips and told him to shut up because I could hear someone rummaging through the corn and stomping on leaves. We both just sat there thinking it was Braden and hoping that he would find us. I then realized that it sounded like multiple people. Then Spencer said, "Wait, isn't Braden the only seeker?" My heart dropped. I began getting scared but tried not to say anything. I could also see that Spencer was scared too, and I bet he was about to shit his pants. Just then, we heard the men speaking to each other, and they didn't sound like any of our friends. So it was confirmed that there were 2 other men in the cornfields with us. They were talking very quietly, but I could hear some words, boys, snatch, just like that. I felt like time stopped. About a minute later, we heard them walk off, and I'm going to assume that they left the cornfield. But after the 2 men left, we heard someone yelling, "Get the fuck away from me! Help!" It sounded like Cameron. Me and Spencer immediately rushed out of the cornfields and went to find Cameron. Just then, everyone else came out of their hiding spots and went after the 2 men. Spencer and John were the tallest and most muscular, so they went in and beat the shit out of them. John put one in a headlock and threw him to the ground. Then one man sprang at Spencer suddenly. Spencer screamed and took out his large pocket knife he always has with him, and then stabbed him 3 times. As they proceeded to beat them, I went to Cameron, helped him to get up, and yelled for everyone to run. Spencer listened and shoved the guy to the ground, but John didn't listen and continued beating the man. After Spencer pulled John off the man, they both finally ran away. We went back to Spencer's house since it was the closest, and we told everything to his mom, and then she called the police. When the police arrived, we led them down to the field, but of course, the men were gone. However, there was still some blood left on the path where Spencer stabbed one of the men, so the police took a sample of it. Once me and Cameron got home, he told me that the man Spencer attacked had a knife, but the other had nothing. I was feeling a little uncomfortable about what we'd done for our self-protection at the cornfield, but then I realized that was a good thing Spencer attacked the man with the knife, because if John tried to attack that man, he could have been stabbed to death as he had no weapon. I'm just thankful none of my friends were hurt that evening. It could have ended much worse. After that, we never heard back from the police, so neither of the men was found.
When I was 12 years old, my family and I moved to a new house. Even though it was a beautiful house, I was scared of it, especially my parents' room. I used to have awful dreams where I would enter that specific room only to see a dark shadow staring at me. It was a tall shadow. It seemed like a man, but I never saw his face since his whole being was just pitch black. I would close the door to my room since my parents' room was in front of mine and I could easily see their room from my bed. One night, I woke up from what seemed like a dreamless sleep, feeling that someone was staring at me. At first, I couldn't see anything. But after my eyes got used to the dark, I saw two things. First, my door was open, which wasn't normal since I always closed it at night. And second, there was the shadow I often saw in my nightmares. This time, it wasn't in my parents' room. It was in front of my room, just staring at me. I was so scared. I couldn't break eye contact with it, and after what seemed like hours, finally the shadow stopped staring at me and walked to my brother's room. After that, I can't remember when I got back to sleep, but only remember waking up, and since then, everything seemed normal. I thought it was only a nightmare and brushed it off. A couple years later, my family and I moved to another state, but we kept the house as a place to visit during the holidays. One day, my uncle had a nasty fight with his wife, and he asked my parents if he could stay at our old house for some time. My parents said yes. So he temporarily moved there for a while. And one day, we visited him for the holidays, and while we were talking, he asked me if I had ever dreamt of creepy shadows in front of my room. My parents laughed, since they knew nothing of what I had seen. I stayed quiet. That night, I talked to my uncle and explained to him what I had seen and what I thought was a nightmare. I was really scared since I had told no one about that nightmare. He listened to me, and after a while, he explained he had seen the same thing just staring at my room. After that, my uncle talked to my parents, and we never visited that house again. My uncle moved back with his wife, and after a religious ceremony to cleanse it, my parents put the house in the market. However, to this day, the house remains unsold. Even though the shadow never hurt any of us physically, I still panic whenever I remember how that thing stared at me, how I felt that there was nothing I could do against it. I don't think I'll ever forget that.
This is a story when I was just 6 years old that I never, ever forget. When I was a little boy, I lived in a big house that had a little chicken coop. Behind my house, you could spot a soccer field, even from far away because it's uphill. One day, two of my cousins, sister, and I decided to go uphill and play on that soccer field. We were going up innocently without knowing what was going to happen to us. As we arrived on top, we were surprised because there were many people around there, and it was just like this festival kind of situation. It was very crowded and loud, but there was enough space to walk comfortably. The four of us got a little bit sad. We couldn't play soccer. There was nothing else to do. So we decided just to take a walk and followed the pathway that headed on top. As we went further up, a dead end was what was waiting for us. We then decided to go back because there was nowhere to go. But as soon as we turned around and stepped down, we noticed that the crowded loud sound, the people at the ground, were gone. Completely. I got scared and shocked. The people vanished in an instant. Not only me, my cousins and my sister were as shocked and scared as me. We just started to scream and ran away quickly. I started late on running away, but I soon caught up with them, passing one of my cousins. But as I was running away, I could feel someone grab one of my legs all of a sudden. It made me fall down hard instantly. My face hit on the ground and my nose was bleeding. I cried so much that time, but my cousins and my sister helped me get up and we ran as fast as we could. When we got home, we got yelled at by my mom, and she asked my sister how come I got injured the way I did and sprained my ankle badly. It was red and swollen. My face got a bit of scratches, and my lips and nose were all bleeding. Later, after that day, my sister told the whole story about that mysterious vanishing to my mother. And then she changed her face, looking a little bit uncomfortable. That field up the hill is a graveyard. And we were all shocked by knowing the truth. So the people we saw up there were dead people. But still, thinking about it again, how can you explain my accident? I thought it was one of my cousins who caught my ankle, but running away and trying to grab someone's ankle is impossible. Maybe it was a warning for me not to go to that field ever again. In any case, I still remember that event so clearly that it gives me chills.